And consumer inflation figures out today, Devon. But of course, the thing is, we see inflation is, of course, steady. But why does it feel like the cost of living is so unbearable?
Yes, it does for many. And that's because, Shahan, that they don't have as much as disposable income that they had, let's say, a few years ago to go ahead and spend money. So on that note, the rate at which prices are rising, yes, indeed, it did remain unchanged, 4.5%. But it's not all good news for consumers. Figures out today from Statistics South Africa showing housing and utility costs rising 4.9% year on year. So here's your inflation figure for June this year, 4.5%, like we said, steady. But when you look deeper, you see the cost of rentals, for example, housing utilities, including water, electricity, and others. That contribution in June was 1.2%. The actual figure of inflation on those items was 4.9%. And that's where the real inflation is happening. And I suppose that's what makes the cost of living just so unbearable. It squeezes consumers, and that's what gives them that sort of stifling feeling at the moment. Economist Kevin Lings explains why.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, everybody. Good morning. Okay, right. Thank you so much.
Start to break down that 4.5%, you find that some areas that consumers are spending money on is incredibly high inflation. So the obvious would be something like electricity, where Eskom recently was granted an increase of around 13 to 14%, and obviously the municipalities then implement that, and consumers find themselves with their electricity cost going up in the order of 13 to 14%. If you look at water expenses, they tend to go up in the order of 11%, and so we find that a lot of the costs that homeowners or people in property are experiencing is going up very significantly relative to the average for the inflation rate.
All right, so you had the new UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson praising Kevin Lings before he got on, but you get the point.
Yeah, we get the point. And of course, his appointment has an impact on our rand, so we'll talk about that later. But first, let's talk about Eskom. Of course, the 59 billion rand bailout over the next 2 years. Some talk of a credit rating downgrade. How's the rand reacting to that?
Yeah, you would have thought that the local currency would have gotten a hit negatively from the talk of the Eskom cash injection. Remember, we also had the IMF cutting our forecast down, but it didn't happen. The rand surprisingly holding steady. It had the news of that cash injection, like we said, with Eskom. There were warnings that it could impact on the fiscus and taxpayer. Then we had that lower forecast from the IMF. But analysts are saying that, look, you know, they're really quite surprised at the resilience. They put this sort of sharper figure against the dollar, this healthier figure, down to hopes that the US-China trade truce has improved sentiment overall. So the rand is not doing too badly against the dollar, staying well below that 14 rand to the dollar mark. So let's just turn our attention to the JSE while we're here. There was news, of course, that that tension between those two big super economic powers was easing, the trade war tooth I speak about, and the new Prime Minister of Britain also coming. That was the big news of the day, but all of that led to mixed global markets, and the JSE grabbing some of that negativity. We see it 1% down today. Banks, retailers, all of them taking a hit, with diversified miners also down. The likes of BHP, by the way, down more than 4%. So there you go, the all-share 1% in the red, financials and banks taking a hit.